Hi, Sam here. Before I get started with the meat of my video today, a few programming notes. The first is I'd like to thank Father Richard Blake, who is a University of Boston professor who was very generous in sharing his work when I reached out to him. And also, if you, not that I think it's a huge issue, but if you have little ones who could possibly be listening to this, now might be the time to turn the video off and go elsewhere because I am going to talk a little bit about Taxi Driver today, and I do it in a PG manner. But even still, I mean, you might get some questions from your kids like, well, yeah, I'll let you turn it off so you don't have to hear those questions. So, anyways, with that, so the question I have on my mind today, and is, are you totally depraved? So, I guess what I mean by that? Well, to begin with, I guess it's one of those things where Paul outlines it pretty well in Romans 7, um, 21 through 23. I find that in a law that evil is present with me, the one who wills to do good. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man. But I see another law in my members warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. So at the base of it, total depravity is really that formulation. I want to do good or I will to do good, but evil is present. Um, and I'll get a little bit more into, I guess, the specifics of that. And I guess I'm not really entirely interested in the theology, I guess, as I'm interested in maybe sort of I guess you could say, kind of dramatic aspects of total depravity. So hopefully that becomes a little more clear as I go through the video. So think of total depravity. It's one of those things where Calvinists are in some ways the most successful theological tradition in the U.S. till about yesterday. Princeton University, for example, which is one of the oldest universities in the country, was affiliated with the with the Presbyterian Church and Reformed theology more generally, and but then you also see this tradition where Calvinists kind of get it both from Catholics and Orthodox Christians who say, "Oh, you're not in touch with the traditions, you're not paying attention to the saints," and other things like that. But then some of the Calvinist language, though, lower church Protestants might say, "Oh, that's not really biblical. It's not necessarily gospel." And I think of, like, for example, there's a YouTube video where there's a guy who, gosh, it really is an atrocity listening to him. But the line for it's a parody of "That's Just the Way Things Are," the song, and the title of the parody is "Calvinists Are Not Saved." And I guess if you're curious about what that's like, I'll put the link below. I don't know if I could really recommend it, but as a sort of cultural touch point, it was kind of an interesting piece and one I kind of thought about because it is reflective of a sort of general idea. And sometimes you hear people will say, "Oh, Calvinists," they think people are totally depraved. It's a shorthand for saying that Calvinists have a tendency to have a negative view of human nature, which I guess on one hand, part of me could say, "Oh, well, maybe they have a realistic view of human nature." But at the same time, it is a real criticism. And you think of it, like you see it, for example, in cultural things like Jonathan Edwards' sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And in that sermon, what he compares the human condition to that of insects on three different occasions. So he uses the analogies of grasshoppers, spiders, and worms. And the word abhor is probably used, gosh, no less than probably, I would guess, at least 30 times. I didn't do like a word search for it. But he was reading the sermon. I guess this was what he had to say to a congregation that was not affected by or not influenced by the Great Awakening. And I'll just read a few segments from it. So he begins with sort of his thesis statement is, there's nothing that keeps wicked men at any one moment out of hell but the mere pleasure of God. God has laid himself under no obligation by any promise to keep any natural man out of hell one moment. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath toward you burns like fire. So there you have it. I mean, you can think of a stereotypical fire and brimstone preacher, though I guess not a Baptist. So he was affiliated with a Congregationalist church, but he had studied at Princeton and was largely his theology was largely Reformed, and it is there. So when he says natural man, that is a key term, and what he's referring to is the idea of someone who has not accepted God's grace. And so you have that idea in your mind, and I guess you think about it, or I think about it, and recently I was watching one of Paul Vanderklay's videos. I'll keep his name out of it because it was behind the paywall, and apparently the person who was on it didn't want it to be on an open channel. But there was a guy who's a fairly famous YouTuber that makes video reactions, and in his video with Paul Vanderklay, he was talking about movies that would seem like an affront, or that people from his Mennonite background would have disliked. And the movie he mentioned was Taxi Driver. And when I heard that, it really got me thinking, like, wow, that is an interesting choice. And because, I mean, well, I guess a lot of people wouldn't like Taxi Driver, not for the slightest reason of which is that it's pretty violent and there's a decent amount of fairly graphic sexuality in it. But I guess as an example of a movie that is godless, or that people who consider themselves Christians might be opposed to, or might actively dislike, I thought, wow, that is an interesting choice. Because, so a little bit of background. So the movie was directed by Martin Scorsese, which probably not news to anyone. And it was written by Paul Schrader. So Paul Schrader was a graduate of Calvin College, and both Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese, at the time when they made this movie, were very much religious, you could say haunted, and had apparently both at times of their life prepared for or considered being part of formal ministry. Martin Scorsese in the Catholic Church, and Paul Schrader in the in the Reformed Church, or specifically the CRC, the Christian Reformed Church. So you have these two people, and interestingly, they do actually, both of them, come back to faith later in life. But at the time, I think it's fair to say they probably didn't really think of themselves as Christians or religious. And they make this movie about this character, Travis Bickle. And Travis Bickle is he's something of a blank slate. He does say a few things about himself, but you don't really know that much about him. And when he talks, he's not very introspective. He doesn't seem to have a real great grasp on why he does things. So he shows up, and it's kind of indicated that he's from somewhere other than New York, though it's not entirely clear where. Schrader, interestingly, actually sort of alludes to the idea of Travis Bickle as being from Michigan, which, I don't know, you look at Robert De Niro, and I don't know, maybe that's what Schrader had in mind, but I don't think that's I don't think that's what Scorsese was necessarily thinking. I mean, he's not exactly the obvious person to cast as someone from Michigan, let alone someone from West Michigan. But anyways, he's there. It's indicated that he's probably from somewhere else other than New York. And he says he's a veteran, which he probably is, but there's no real allusions or any specific details about the service that he was in. He's just someone who was around, who was about the age of someone who would be in Vietnam. So he begins this job, and they ask him, "Why do you want this job?" And he says, "Well, I'm up all night. I am wandering around this city, and I can't get any sleep, so I figure I might as well get paid for it." So here he is in the mid-'70s in New York, and the city is what reasonably could be described as a hellscape. There's litter everywhere. There's all these sex workers who are on the street. There's a fair number of pimps who are out in the open. They're threatening women, and he sees all this, and so one of the things that happens is, as I was saying before, Bickle isn't a very introspective character. So we don't necessarily know a whole lot about what he's thinking. And that's part of what makes Taxi Driver a movie that was written about so much. So here he is. So I guess one of the things that I read and one of the things I came across was this idea that the other characters in Taxi Driver are projections of Bickle's psyche. In particular, there's one guy who talks about shooting his wife, and there wasn't a few pieces I read the idea that that person might have not actually been someone who was there. It was sort of Bickle's imagination saying things that he couldn't handle himself or thoughts that he had. But I don't actually know if that's correct. I think of it, and I think it's fair to say that what the film shows of New York, it's legitimately horrifying. I mean, there's later in the film, for example, a prostitute played by Jodie Foster, who is a 12-year-old girl, and she is being harassed by a pimp who pulls a knife out on her. So there really is a real dark element to what's being shown, and it doesn't. So And while I guess Bickle's language and the way he deals with it is maybe not always productive, and it's maybe a little bit gross at times, but he seems to be like virtually the only character in the film that shows any kind of moral repulsion. So you see in him here, he's a character who is in sort of in a state of nature. He's not he doesn't seem to have a community. He doesn't seem to we don't he has some family, but they're not really present. And and he's thrown into this environment that is just objectively awful. So with that, the other characters in the film seem to actually either not notice or in some ways not be affected by the things that are happening around them and what they're seeing. But he seems to have a real revulsion about it. And I guess one of the things I thought of, I was thinking about this film, and I mean, it's like, so a question you could have is this a godless movie? And I guess I was thinking, no, it's actually not a godless movie as much as it is a meditation on godlessness. So it's about a character who he senses that there's something wrong in the society he's in, and he wants to do better. He wants to, in some ways, improve himself. He talks about that explicitly near the beginning of the movie, but he doesn't know how, and he only has the tools that are given to him, which are violence for one, but also a kind of aggressive sexuality too. And so here he is in this situation, and well, Father Blake, I guess the way he talks about it, he talks about the film as being really about loneliness, and he uses a phrase of Calvin what was written about Adam, but he applies it towards Travis Bickle in the movie. So the line is, he was removed from God and became a complete stranger. As a consequence, nothing was left to him save ignorance, inequity, impotence, death, and judgment. So here he is, and he's in this situation. He wants to improve himself, and he sees there's a campaign headquarters for a politician that comes up, and the politician's name is Palatine. Now, Palatine, what that means in French is like a local emissary of a feudal lord. So here he is, he's the worker, or if you will, the serf, and he sees the headquarter of the Palatine, or if you will, it's the same root word as palace. And in it, he sees a lady, Betsy is her name, and he has this like moment where he senses that she's someone that he would want to improve his life and to work to be with. And he goes into the headquarters, into the palace, as it were, and he asks her on a date. Initially, he asks her to go to coffee, and she's taken a little bit back, but she's like, "You know what? This guy, he put himself out there. He seems to be taking this seriously. I'll go out with him." After that, he requests her to go to a movie, and so here he is. He he dresses up, and I mean, here's young Robert De Niro. He's actually a pretty good-looking guy. He wears a red suit, and here's Sybil Shepherd is next to him, and he cleans himself up. He buys her a present. He's being polite, and then he takes her, and they go. And this is really the moment that I think probably has stuck with me the most of the movie. They go to a porn theater. And at first you're kind of like, okay, this is strange, and you're a little bit taken back. And the thing is, it's not like they do drugs before they go, or that Travis is coming on to her or talking her up before they go to the movie. They just walk in, and the way they're dressed, their body language is all that of someone who's on just any kind of other date. And they go in, and she's terrified, and she's like, why am I here? And Travis seems legitimately confused. He seems to think, okay, why wouldn't you want to be here? Isn't this, he even says, isn't this what couples do? And she storms out, and she leaves, and the whole time he seems to not understand that he had done anything wrong. And I thought about it, and like, wow, there it is. I mean, I want to do good, but evil is present. And I mean, it's a theme you see. I won't go into the plot details of the film further on, but it's right there. I mean, we can look at it, and I guess the whole point of any kind of art is that it presents something like that in a dramatic, or at least absurd or over-the-top way. And yeah, I mean, you could look at it, you could say, wow, this guy's really, well, he's really fucked in the head. But I mean, I guess how often I guess with like my wife, how often do I try to do something kind for her, but I'm not thinking at all about her or what she wants? Or how often do I make a kind gesture, like buy a present or say something nice to someone, not because of not because I genuinely love them or I want to do something good for them, but because I want to either get something for them, or I want to, in some ways, feed my ego to make myself feel like a good person. And I guess at the base of it, that's really kind of what total depravity is, right? It's the idea that you want to do good, but evil is present. Travis wants to be a better man. He wants to have someone who he can depend on in his life, and someone he can provide for. He maybe even wants to have a family, but he's not given the tools to do that, and he doesn't seem to know how. And while his dilemma is a more dramatic one, it's not one that's that different from the rest of us. So I guess the way I'm talking about this, though, and I was thinking about it, so I would say, though, actually, yeah, it's kind of, in a sense, all wrong. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm talking about total depravity. I'm talking about it as something about a person. And that's not wrong. It is about people. It is about human nature. But ultimately, it's not so much about that. It's about the relationship between humanity and God. And I was thinking about a section from The Weight of Glory, where C.S. Lewis asks this question, are all humans of equal value? Now, you think of the word value, And in the Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis is using it in a positive sense. So by value, he means do all people have equally good characteristics? But value isn't necessarily a word that has a specific positive connotation. It could also, it just means what is your position. So you could say, are all people of equal position? And I mean, I guess if you think of it that way, you could almost read the segment and you could read it as, are all people depraved? So with that in mind, I'll just go ahead and read it because I think he probably says it better than I can. It is idle to say that men are of equal value. A value is taken in a worldly sense if we mean that all men are equally useful or beautiful or good or entertaining, then it is nonsense. If it means that all are of equal value as immortal souls, I think it conceals a dangerous error. The infinite value of each human soul is not a Christian doctrine. God did not die for man because of some value he perceived in him. The value of each human soul, considered simply in itself, out of relationship to God, is zero. As St. Paul writes, to have died for valuable men would have been not divine, but merely heroic. But God died for sinners. He loved us, not because we were lovable, but because he is love. It may be that he loves all equally. He certainly loved us all to the death. And I am not certain what the expression means. If there is equality, it is in his love, not in us. So, I mean, really, ultimately, so I guess to circle back to the question, are you totally depraved? Yes, you're exactly the same as Travis Bickle. No. No, but the answer is yes. So Paul, to circle back to it, in Romans, he formulates the idea, I find then law that evil is present in me, the one who wills to do good. So, I mean, that's it at the base, that I want to do good, but evil is present. So, I mean, so I guess when you think about depravity, and I mean, so it doesn't mean that all people are evil, worthless, or immoral in some way, as much as it means that there is the capacity for that in you, for one, and for two, even if you try to do something, you can be undermined by your nature. I think of, like, for example, the gospel passages about people who give money for recognition. And I mean, I guess ultimately I hope I'm not that kind of person, but the truth is, no one, if you ask those people, why are you giving this money, they wouldn't tell you, oh, I want to have my name on the wall here, or I want other people to see me, and maybe I'll get a job promotion because they think I'm a good moral citizen. They probably would tell you something else, but on some level, they're deceiving themselves, right? So I guess the whole point of total depravity is to be conscious of the fact that you are in some ways always going to have this thorn in your side, as it were. So I mean, it shouldn't be ultimately despair as much as a realization that you're not enough by yourself. And I guess I thought about this, and I thought of the kind of, I guess Chad has really colonized my mind here, because I thought of the steps of AA. So I thought, okay, we We admitted we were powerless, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us. And I know this third one I kind of put in my own words, but made a decision to turn away from ourselves and towards God. So, and there it is. I mean, it's such simple language, but it's right there. I mean, that should be ideally the reaction to the idea of total depravity, that you're not enough in yourself, but that if you turn away from yourself, you can, in some ways, become a better person. So, yeah. So, or to put it in the words of the Heidelberg Catechism, you are not your own. Now, that's about it for today. Gosh, I really, honestly, when I was planning this, I didn't think I was going to be making a sermon, but I guess I'm falling into, PVK's trap of, or well, I shouldn't say his trap, it's not, but the trap he talks about of becoming a frustrated internet preacher. So, well, thank you. Leave a comment if there's anything you liked, disliked. Let me know, and I hope to see you again soon.